said. In 1950, the United States had 90% of all the patents for invention issued in the planet Earth. Now we're down in the low 30s and dropping fast, because once you destroy this imagination, which was specifically recommended by some names I'm going to give you so you can verify this independently, but all of the big thinkers who led to the schooling we know said, first you have to destroy the imagination of ordinary people, or they'll think up ways to escape this or get around this. But once the imagination was gone, all that stream of invention...
It's the engine of innovation, of creativity, and of rebellion.
Yes. I mean, and it was certainly a source of incredible wealth. I'm invited to speak about half a dozen times so far by the Chinese government, and I've been in all different parts of China. And the funny thing is the three American businesses which clearly dominate China, it's really amusing in a way, are all built around imagination. I'll tell you, every Chinese I saw was playing American computer games while they were sitting in a McDonald's eating, I don't mean this too critically, but eating pieces of meat that I'll tell you in human history nobody would eat except slaves. But anyway, all the movies, all the traveling acts at the big hotels, they're all American because the imagination is gone in China. They can recruit hundreds of millions of people to, work around the clock for $2, but they can't. They steal our patent. I know that your listeners know this. They steal our patents and our copyrights regularly.
Here's an example. Until about 1915, going back to 1800, the U.S. had over half the patents, 4% of the population had half the world's wealth. Because of feudalism, there was no imagination. They just institutionalized this system, and that's why we dominated the world. Now the globalists have seized us and used us as an engine to dominate, but now they've depleted and destroyed their brain trust.
Yes. Well, let me get back, though, to Prussia. So Prussia's studied all over the world by ambitious nations, including the United States, and the lessons how to do this to your population are brought back. The trouble in the United States was, as Abraham Lincoln said in 1859 to the Wisconsin Agricultural Association, virtually everyone in the United States, 75% of the population, had an independent livelihood. They were small farmers, they were entrepreneurs, they were dressmakers, they were traveling entertainers, and they didn't buckle under because they weren't tied to some bureaucratic ladder of jobs. So it took a long time, and what it took was several crushing inflations, financial panics, and several big wars to pull this off. Under the cover of these wars and financial panics, institutional schooling was set up to deliver the same kind of mindless or semi-mindless citizenry that Prussia had enjoyed. And
now we see the average American, 1/5 can't find the U.S. on a map. 70+% of high school graduates don't even know what a continent is.
Or where the Pacific Ocean is. Yeah, right. No, it's way beyond what the newspapers cover.
That's what Orwell talked about, though. He had discovered this, how they were destroying language, reducing it by design. It's like people listening to us right now either have escaped this, or a new listener who's been under this control can't even understand us right now.
Well, I must add to your Orwell allusion that Orwell was in the outer fringes of this thing when it was happening, so he didn't discover it. He actually listened to the people planning this, and when he wrote 1984, which all the American papers said had to be about the Soviet Union, he was talking about London in England.
Oh, yeah, he said that, yeah.
Yeah, but that's conveniently
But he wrote letters. He wrote letters where he said that because he'd been a secret policeman in India. Then he'd fought against the fascists in Italy, in Spain. Then he'd been a propagandist for BBC during the war.
Right.
And he finally figured out they were controlling it all.
Well, it was his BBC contacts, who were rather proud of what they were doing. Really, the whole idea, we call part of that group now the Fabian Socialists, but the idea was that biologically, you and I and about 95% of the population are permanently inferior. I want to source that for you so that anyone who says this is wild talk can check it for themselves. It was Charles Darwin who said that in 1871 in the book called Descent of Man. He said only a few of the human race are evolving. Everybody else is a dead end, and if you can't...
And then that expanded into his protege, Sir Francis Galton, the father of eugenics.
Oh, well, Galton was more than his protege. It was his first cousin. It was his first cousin was Galton.
Now, I want to be clear. You independently have done all the same research I've done, discovered the same thing. So has Alan Watts. So have many others. The point is, people keep thinking we're getting this from each other. I've never heard you till a few years ago and heard you once. The point is that we're all discovering the same thing. And listeners, if you go research this, you're going to find the same thing. Go ahead.
It's not, with the Internet, it's fairly easy to read. You don't have to go to an interpreter of this data. You can go directly to the data.
To them.
You can pick at random any book that Galton ever wrote. That's Darwin's first cousin. And the hair will stand up on your head. And he's advising. I don't think many people know this.
And then his protege, of course, was H.G. Wells, whose protege was then Julian Huxley. But go ahead.
The Darwin family wasn't just a wealthy family. They were among the supreme fortunes on planet Earth. So rather than thinking of Charles Darwin as a scholar speaking to other scholars, you're talking about a man who was in the inner circle around the British throne, who had fantastic wealth, Galton also, and spoke to, dukes and earls and heads of industry so that...
And plus, their idea of the elite being supermen and us being dogs, that was already the elite's ideas for thousands of years. So they tailored a science to fit into that elitist approach.
See, the idea certainly has been around. You can find it clearly in
But it was scientifically codified, yes.
Yeah, so it starts, I'll say it starts. It starts in easily accessible documents with Plato's Republic and his Utopia of the Law.
2,400 years, yes.
And he'll say people are frozen into these categories. The whole idea that they can get out of these categories is just nuts. So, but from Plato it goes to a very, very important theological work of the 15th century. It goes to John Calvin, and
yes.
Calvin says there's so many of these inferior people damned by God before they're born, that's predestination, that we can't lock them up or police them. We're going to have to teach them how to police themselves, and we'll do that by establishing universal schooling. So after Calvin says what Plato said philosophically, Calvin said theologically, just a short time later, about 150 years later, the big gun in this, and I'm going to give your readers a book. Well, no. I'm talking about a Dutch philosopher named Spinoza, Spinoza, who's carried in American colleges as one of the most liberal philosophers who ever lived. What you have to read is the same book